Warhammer 40k is a game. Or so I'm told. To me it's mostly an excuse to build models from absolute trash and mess around with paint. Anyway, I recently had a big think about starting a new army and I wanted to see if I could get away with building a 2,000-point army for less than $20. Why $20? Because that is the general price of Tabletop Simulator on Steam. Obviously at that price point we can forget about buying any actual kits. We have to poor hammer this one and go DIY. So, before we start, some disclaimers. Number 1, I obviously can't use any bits from my bits box, pile of shame or gifted parts, that would be cheating the budget. 2, whatever I make also has to be somewhat representative of what it's supposed to be. I can't for example make paper cutouts or just write something on an empty base. And 3, I did not include paint in this budget, since unpainted models are still perfectly playable. When starting on this mission the first place I looked was Chaos Knights. Building mutated monstrosities is really simple and you can squeeze a lot of points into a small number of models with for example the Chaos Acastus Knight Asterius, whatever that is. For 765 points. But you know what's even more points, and even simpler to build, the Stompa. 800 points, able to pump out anywhere between 37 and 62 shots per turn, and the trash construction is more than representative, it's lore accurate. While it would be amazing to run 3 Stompas and leave it at that, it sadly takes us over the 2,000 point limit, so let's take 2 Stompas and a Morkanaut. At 1880 points, this already gets me close to the goal, but we also need a character as a general. This is a slightly more difficult since making actual characters instead of walkers might require some sculpting of faces. Clay or green stuff is way out of our league price-wise, but let's go with something boxy for now, like a mech. So that's the plan. 1940 points total, with just enough over to pick any enhancement you like. When doing a big project like this it's important to have a clear and solid blueprint to follow. Otherwise the end result might not turn out all wonky and asymmetrical. So I started by drawing up my wedding cake Stompa design. And the arcade cabinet-shaped Morkanaut. As so many others before me, the skirt of my Stompas will be constructed from plastic flower pots that I picked up for less than $2 each. The rest of the army will be made from 100% genuine homegrown and locally produced trash. All held together with about $14 worth of superglue. I cut and folded a piece of paper into the middle part of the Stompa and added some support inside it so that it doesn't collapse. And after covering the holes in the bottom of the flower pot it could be mounted right on top. For the upper part I'm using this coffee lid. Since I don't drink coffee myself I would never had thought of using something like that if I hadn't found it on the ground. With the basic shape of the body done it's just a matter of slapping on random bits of cardboard onto it until most of the surface is covered with something. Except for what will be the front and the back. The front will get the first and biggest set of spiky teeth jaws and the typical skull that all things orc need. Now that I have the big skull as a reference for my proportions, I can add a more face-friendly row of teeth to the top part. On the back I'm planning on using a plastic piece from a packet of cookies as sort of a grate or vent, so the crew inside can get the smell of freshly baked treats while operating this thing. I only needed half of it so I could reuse the other half on the second Stompa later. I then started on the most important part, the stompers. Whenever I need to build three-dimensional shapes, I glue a thicker piece of cardboard to a paper in whatever angle I need and then simple cut along the edge. Then flip it over and repeat until all the sides are covered. The feet looked good, but needed some toes and of course, more teeth. I mounted them on a round piece that pressure fits inside the pot. I'm not going to glue this in place since it conveniently allows me to store other models inside the Stompa when transporting it to and from games. I was considering adding loops at the bottom of the pot for a strap to carry my entire army as a sling bag, but ultimately decided against it from a fashion perspective. I added a pair of shoulders the same way I made the feet. And then it was time to decide on the guns. I have this soap dispenser pump part that I think looks somewhat like a retro-futuristic ray gun, so I added it as the left arm. But obviously we need more DACA. So I cut up some straws to make the barrels of a chain gun. For the other arm, I used the rest of the soap dispenser, and some other bits to make a grabby claw. Right around here my glue bottle ran empty, and while I didn't specifically film it I simply attached it to the gun arm as well. And with all that done it was just a matter of adding more random pieces of paper to simulate the layers and layers of scrap metal. I covered all the gaps and ugly edges with even more ugly edges, cut some pieces of from the bottom of the pot to make it less even, and glued them back on again to make it even more uneven. As you can see, the final build perfectly follows the blueprint, and since it turned out so perfectly, I went ahead and made the second one the exact same way. The Morkanaut started out as a little arcade cabinet, before getting a bottle cap head and two slanted doors on the front. For some detailing on the sides, I'm using these old frames from a pair of 3D glasses. A wall hanger to create a bit of space, and a balloon holder thing cut in half to make the pauldrons. The Morkanaut's gun was made the exact same way as the Stompa's, only using fewer barrels, which needed a small spacer to stay aligned but could then be attached to the arm. For the back, I found this card holder that had some nice angles to it. The Morkanaut's feet are not as stompy as the Stompa's, but they do look a bit more articulated, so I made a knee joint out of another wall hanger and a straw to connect to the lumpy foot. Similarly, the claw arm also has a few more degrees of movement by the looks of it, so I made it in several small polygons and angled it outstretched to show that it isn't as locked to the body as the gun arm. The claws themselves were cut from a lid and angled in a menacingly pointing motion. After that, I added the ever-important teeth. And there we have another perfectly planned and executed build. For my mech general, I just so happen to have a perfectly shaped random piece of plastic to use as a template, and after that, I could extrapolate some numbers to build a correctly sized base. The main body was again made as a polygon, but for the rest of the mech I will mostly be using this wall plug. The rounded tip was cut off to make the mech's forehead. The flared bottom part became a neck. I carefully placed a visor on the face to complete the welding mask, completely bypassing having to sculpt a face. Another bit of the wall plug was glued to the back before adding a tube as a groin and some tiny feet. With the last piece of plug as an arm and a nice apron to cover up the horrible joints, the mech was done. All I had to do was decorate the base a little before gluing him in place. And with that the entire army was finished. As I said at the beginning, I'm not counting paints into the budget since, at this point, these would fulfill their purpose as game pieces just fine. But of course, I couldn't help myself from tying it all together with a pro-level paint application, so please enjoy the finished result.